You think you know how the military spends your money? You absolutely do not. They built a nuclear cannon whose only safety instruction was run. They spent 20 years paying soldiers to stare at walls and move things with their minds. They created a shark repellent that made sharks more interested. And they constructed an entire warship for $4 billion that gets seasick. Subscribe right now, because if you miss what comes next on this list, your brain will never fully recover from the curiosity. And we are not responsible for that. 1. Somewhere in US Army history, a general looked at a pigeon and thought, "Yes, this is our future spy." The military actually strapped tiny cameras to pigeons and called it aerial reconnaissance. Fully serious, fully funded, fully proud of themselves. The birds flew off into the sky like little feathered agents on a mission. They came back right on schedule too. The photos they delivered were a stunning collection of blurry, completely useless images of nothing but their own feet. The Pentagon framed 0 of them. 2. Picture a bomb. Now picture that bomb attached to a bat. Now picture the US military genuinely believing this was their smartest idea since sliced bread. During World War II, America funded an entire project around strapping incendiary devices to live bats and dropping them over Japan. The bats did not read the mission briefing. They flew straight back to a US airbase, crawled under a general's personal car, and burned it to a crisp. Japan was fine. The general was not. 3. The Soviet Union looked at its loyal, trained, well-fed dogs and thought these animals would make perfect suicide bombers. They strapped explosives onto dogs, trained them to run under enemy tanks, and sent them charging onto the battlefield with full military confidence. There was one catastrophic flaw nobody addressed during training. The dogs had only ever practiced with Soviet tanks. So on the actual battlefield, they completely ignored the German tanks, spun around, ran straight back to their own side, and blew up Soviet soldiers instead. Man's best friend. Worst military strategist. 4. Britain constructed a giant concrete sound mirror on its coastline and told the entire nation it was a revolutionary early warning system against enemy aircraft. Soldiers were stationed, alarms were connected. Everyone waited for the moment this genius invention would save the country. That moment arrived during a critical test when the system detected a massive incoming threat and triggered a full emergency response across the base. Every soldier scrambled into position. The threat was a herd of cows casually wandering through a field nearby. Britain stood down. The cows moved on unbothered. 5. The US Navy once sat inside a real government building, with real government funding, and approved a chemical weapon designed specifically to make enemy soldiers romantically attracted to each other. The thinking was that if soldiers started falling for their battlefield neighbors, they would stop shooting and start swooning. The gay bomb never got built, never got tested, and never came close to working. It did, however, win an Ig Nobel Prize, which is essentially the universe's official certificate for ideas so magnificently stupid they accidentally become historic. 6. Military intelligence once decided the most devastating weapon imaginable was a dead rat stuffed with explosives. Hundreds of these booby-trapped rodents were manufactured, packed up, and shipped out for deployment near enemy boiler rooms. Not a single one ever made it to its target. The enemy intercepted the very first shipment before deployment even began. Rather than being horrified, they were fascinated, studied every rat carefully, documented the entire concept, and published their findings. The exploding rats never blew up anything except the reputations of everyone who signed off on the idea. 7. DARPA once burned through serious American taxpayer money designing a mechanical elephant for jungle combat in Vietnam. Engineers held actual meetings. Drawings were made. Proposals were submitted. The entire project centered on building a giant robotic elephant that could haul military equipment through thick jungle terrain. Nobody in any of those meetings apparently thought to mention that real elephants had been doing exactly this for several thousand years and were available without requiring a single engineering breakthrough. The project was canceled. Real elephants everywhere remained completely indifferent to the whole situation. 8. Britain buried nuclear bombs in West Germany during the Cold War and needed them to stay warm enough to actually function through freezing winters underground. Scientists were consulted. Engineers were briefed. After all that expert input, the British military arrived at their official solution, which was to stuff live chickens inside the bomb casing to generate body heat. This program was named Blue Peacock and exists in real declassified government documents anyone can read today. The chickens selected for this patriotic duty were never informed of their assignment or their odds of survival. 9. Someone in military planning genuinely proposed building a full aircraft carrier out of ice, and the U.S. Army said yes, fund it immediately. The vessel was called Habakkuk, reinforced with sawdust to increase durability, and a working prototype was constructed in Canada for a live demonstration in front of senior admirals. The admirals arrived, took their seats, and watched the presentation begin. Then they watched the prototype begin melting in real time directly in front of them. It slowly dissolved into the lake while everyone stood in silence. The project was discontinued shortly after. 10. The U.S. Air Force built a fighter jet so extraordinarily fast that after firing its guns, the plane would actually overtake its own bullets mid-flight and get shot down by itself. This was not a theory. This was a real engineering problem that required a real solution. That solution was a 12-second timer on the weapons system, giving the plane enough of a head start to outrun its own gunfire. Engineers celebrated this fix as a genuine breakthrough. At no point did anyone seriously suggest perhaps just building a slightly slower airplane instead. 11. Russia unveiled the Tsar tank during WW1, and the entire enemy side was genuinely terrified just looking at the drawings. It had massive bicycle wheels taller than a house, a giant rotating turret, and an overall appearance that screamed unstoppable destruction. Engineers were celebrated. Generals were excited. The machine rolled out for its very first field test, hit a patch of soft mud, sank straight into the ground, and never moved again. It sat rusting in that exact field for 10 straight years until someone eventually came and scrapped it for parts. 12. Britain developed a fog dispersal system during World War II to keep airfields operational in low visibility conditions, and everyone involved genuinely believed this was an efficient use of wartime resources. The system worked by burning fuel along the runway edges to generate enough heat to clear the fog. It consumed exactly 100,000 gallons of fuel every single hour of operation. Each time one aircraft successfully landed, the fuel cost exceeded the entire value of the plane itself. Britain ran this system with a completely straight face for years and called it a triumph. 13. The Pentagon once handed $50 million to a team of engineers and asked them to develop a revolutionary non-lethal dazzle weapon capable of disorienting enemy combatants in the field. The team worked diligently, spent the budget thoroughly, and delivered their finished product to military leadership. It was a flashlight, a very bright flashlight in a slightly aggressive casing. When soldiers saw the final product, several of them immediately pointed out that an identical flashlight was available at Walmart for $12. The Pentagon accepted delivery and thanked everyone for their service. 14. The U.S. Army in the 1960s decided jetpacks were the future of infantry combat and invested heavily in making that vision a reality. Soldiers were fitted with gleaming personal jetpacks, cameras were rolling, and the future of warfare was officially arriving. Each test flight launched the soldier into the air with tremendous noise and impressive thrust. Then exactly 21 seconds later, the fuel ran out completely. The soldier landed approximately 30 feet from where he started and walked the remainder of the mission on foot like every soldier before him had done for centuries. 15. Germany's engineers during World War II drafted plans for the Landkreuzer P-1000 Rata, a tank so incomprehensibly massive it weighed 1,000 tons and stretched longer than a city block. Generals reviewed the blueprints with wide eyes and approved the vision immediately. Construction preparations began before anyone thought to consult a single roadmap or engineering survey. It was eventually discovered that not one bridge in all of Europe could physically support the tank's weight. Not one road could carry it. The rot never moved an inch under its own power because it was never built. 16. America developed a bomb-aiming device during World War II, so technically advanced and mechanically complicated that bomber crews needed a full hour of careful mid-flight calibration just to get it ready for use. Engineers were extremely proud of this precision instrument and considered it a masterpiece of wartime technology. There was one small operational issue nobody adequately addressed during development. By the time the crew finished the 1-hour calibration process inside the aircraft, the plane had already flown completely past the target city and was well into enemy territory heading nowhere useful. 17. The Soviet Union decided that combining tanks and aircraft into one vehicle was the obvious next step in military evolution, and went ahead and built a flying tank. The A-40 glider tank was towed into the sky by another aircraft, released and sent gliding toward the battlefield entirely under its own wing power. It flew exactly one time. The landing was described generously as rough and less generously as catastrophic. The tank hit the ground so violently that its cannon was permanently damaged, and the vehicle never fired a single shot in its entire military career. 18. America spent $13 million engineering a remote-controlled lawnmower specifically designed to clear minefields without risking human lives. The concept was genuinely clever, the engineering was reportedly solid, and everyone involved was optimistic about the future of mine-clearing technology. The machine was deployed into an actual minefield on day 1 of field operations, rolled forward with mechanical confidence, and was immediately blown into several dozen pieces by the first mine it encountered. The entire $13 million program was destroyed within minutes of its first real-world test. The mines won. 19. The CIA once sat around a table and decided the perfect spy camera needed to be disguised as something nobody would ever look at twice or want to get anywhere near. After careful consideration, they designed and manufactured a fully functional camera hidden inside a realistic replica of dog feces. The fake turd camera was built, tested, and handed to field agents for deployment in Soviet target zones. Every single agent who received it refused to place it anywhere in public. It was never used operationally once. Apparently, even Cold War spies had their limits. 20. Germany's WW Paris gun was so astronomically large and so extraordinarily complicated that it required a crew of 80 trained soldiers just to operate it as a functional unit. Aiming the weapon at the city of Paris took an entire full day of adjustments, calculations, and mechanical preparation before a single shell could be fired. After all that effort, the barrel was so badly worn from heat and friction that it could only fire 20 shots before becoming completely unusable. 80 people, 1 full day, 20 shots. Paris remained standing and largely unimpressed throughout the entire ordeal. 21. The People Sniffer arrived in Vietnam as one of the most sophisticated detection systems the U.S. military had ever deployed. Sensors dropped from helicopters were designed to sniff out human presence from the air by detecting body odor rising through the jungle canopy below. The program ran confidently for months before anyone admitted the results were completely unreliable, and the data was essentially meaningless in real operational conditions. It turned out the jungle itself, full of heat, moisture, and decomposing organic matter, smelled strongly enough of humans to trigger the sensors constantly, regardless of whether any actual people were present anywhere nearby. 22. Burning the English Channel seemed perfectly logical to British military planners in World War II, and nobody in the room apparently disagreed loudly enough to stop it. The idea was simple: flood the water with oil, ignite it, and turn the sea itself into an impassable wall of fire against any German invasion fleet. A test burn was organized to prove the concept before full deployment. The wind had different plans entirely. It caught the flames, pushed them sideways along the current, and sent the entire burning mass drifting cheerfully back toward a British port. The invasion barrier nearly destroyed the country it was built to protect. 23. Here is a fun fact about WWI gas masks that the military somehow forgot to include in every single training document ever printed. They only worked if the soldier wearing one had a completely clean-shaved face. Without a proper seal against bare skin, the mask was essentially decorative. Thousands of soldiers with beards marched confidently onto the front lines, strapped their masks on during gas attacks, and inhaled poison directly through the gaps in their facial hair while feeling fully protected. The military distributed millions of words of official guidance and managed to leave out the single sentence that would have saved the most lives. 10 years. That is how long the U.S. Air Force worked on designing an ejector seat for helicopter pilots before anybody thought to look directly upward and notice the giant, spinning rotor blades sitting immediately above the cockpit. The entire purpose of the ejector seat was to launch the pilot upward to safety. The rotor blades would have immediately destroyed anything traveling upward through them at speed. A decade of salaries, prototypes, and progress reports were generated before this question surfaced in a meeting. The answer required building an explosive rotor jettison system first. That became its own project. That project also quietly went nowhere over several more years. 25. 3 shots. That is all the U.S. Navy's celebrated railgun could fire before the barrel melted completely from the friction of its own projectiles moving through it. Years of development, genuine scientific excitement, and considerable taxpayer investment went into a weapon that could technically fire faster than anything else on the ocean, but needed a full barrel replacement every 3 rounds. The replacement cost per session exceeded the price of the conventional missiles the railgun was designed to make obsolete. The Navy had essentially built the world's most expensive and least practical slingshot, and was deeply proud of it for longer than it should have been. 26. 638 times. That is how many assassination attempts the CIA officially documented against Fidel Castro, and not one of them worked even slightly. The exploding cigar was crafted to detonate on ignition. The poisoned wetsuit was prepared for his snorkeling trips. The booby-trapped decorative seashell was placed on the ocean floor where he liked to dive. Castro went snorkeling, smoked cigars, and collected seashells for decades without incident. He outlived the agents who designed the plans, the supervisors who approved them, and at least one entire government that funded the whole program. History has rarely seen such a perfect losing streak. 27. Portable toilets nearly started an air war. The Sergeant York was introduced as America's most advanced anti-aircraft targeting system. A gun so sensitive and precise it could lock onto incoming threats faster than anything previously fielded. During testing, it demonstrated exactly that level of sensitivity by immediately locking onto the spinning ventilation fans on nearby portable latrine facilities and tracking them across the sky as confirmed enemy aircraft. Soldiers watched their premier air defense system hunt bathroom exhaust fans with focused intensity while actual test drones flew overhead, undetected. The Pentagon classified the ventilation fan incidents and moved on without addressing them publicly. 28. 4 times the British Air Ministry put the bouncing bomb proposal in front of a review board, and 4 times it came back stamped with some variation of the word no. The official correspondence described the concept as too silly, impractical, and unworthy of Royal Air Force resources. The inventor kept returning anyway, spent 8 months fighting for a proper hearing, and eventually got one. The bomb was built. The damn raid succeeded spectacularly, and it became one of the most celebrated military operations in British history. Somewhere in a filing cabinet, those 4 rejection letters still exist, quietly aging alongside some very uncomfortable memories. 29. $4.4 billion is a significant amount of money to spend on a warship that makes its entire crew sick on a regular basis. The USS Zumwalt is genuinely the stealthiest surface vessel ever built, its radar signature smaller than a fishing boat despite being a full guided missile destroyer. And the engineering achievement behind that is completely real. The hull shape that creates that stealth profile also generates violent rolling in moderately rough seas. The crew experiences seasickness with uncomfortable and well-documented regularity. The Navy received the most advanced warship in human history, and the sailors aboard it spend meaningful portions of deployment looking for somewhere to lie down quietly. 30. A general wanted a joyride, and that decision ended one of the most ambitious aviation programs the Soviet Union ever produced. The flying aircraft carrier was a real machine, an enormous plane that carried smaller fighters clipped directly to its wings and could release them mid-flight over enemy territory. It represented years of engineering ambition and Soviet military pride. Then the general arrived with his personal pilot, boarded the aircraft for a casual trip, and the pilot decided mid-flight to attempt a loop maneuver in a plane roughly the size of a city block. It crashed immediately. The program was canceled before the wreckage finished settling. 31. Bulletproof silk sounds like something a confused king invented after a rough Tuesday, not an official U.S. Army procurement decision. But there it was, a silk vest issued to WWI soldiers. With full confidence it would stop bullets on an active battlefield. It stopped exactly 0 bullets during its entire operational deployment. What it did successfully stop was one ceremonial sword, swung slowly during a controlled demonstration that had nothing remotely in common with real combat. The Army recorded this in official documents as a partial success. Nobody in that room apparently felt the need to push back on that conclusion. 32. America's primary submarine weapon in World War II had one deeply inconvenient habit. The Mark 14 torpedo ran too deep, missed its targets consistently, and occasionally circled back toward the submarine that had just fired it. Crews reported this immediately and with some urgency. The Navy reviewed their complaints and officially told them they were wrong. This went on for 2 full years across dozens of failed missions before the Navy finally admitted in writing that the torpedo had been defective from day one. The submarines had been correct the entire time. The paperwork acknowledging this took considerably longer to produce than it should have. 33. The Atomic Annie was a nuclear cannon, and that name alone should have triggered at least one serious conversation during the design phase. It could fire a live nuclear shell, which everyone agreed was impressive. Then someone calculated the blast radius and held it next to the cannon's maximum firing range. The numbers were not compatible with crew survival. The explosion would reach the soldiers operating the weapon every single time it was fired. Military leadership studied this finding carefully and delivered their official solution. Soldiers were instructed to run very fast immediately after pulling the trigger. That was the entire plan. 34. During a British Royal Navy harbor exercise, someone looked out at the water and noticed a rubber duck floating alongside the actual warships in formation. Any reasonable person would have fished it out and moved on. Instead, a Royal Navy administrator picked up the official paperwork, assigned the rubber duck a vessel classification, and entered it into the insurance registry for the exercise. A child's bath toy received full formal recognition as a naval vessel. The documentation was processed, filed, and it still exists in official records today. The Royal Navy completed this paperwork with the same straight face it uses for everything else. 35. DARPA decided Navy divers needed protection from sharks and funded a proper scientific solution to that problem. A spray repellent formula was developed, tested in controlled settings, and eventually declared ready for an official live demonstration with real sharks in real water. The demonstration did not go as scripted. One diver was bitten during the evaluation. The remaining sharks swam directly and calmly through the repellent cloud without changing their behavior in any noticeable way. DARPA had invested considerable resources into developing a product that sharks either actively enjoyed or simply chose to ignore. The program continued briefly after that before quietly disappearing. 36. The proposal arrived at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers completely serious and completely official. Someone wanted to dam the entire Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia to control Arctic Ocean temperatures. An engineering review was conducted. The concrete required to build the structure was calculated. That calculation revealed the project would consume more concrete than every construction project in human history combined had ever produced up to that point. The review board documented this finding carefully. The proposal was then set aside without further discussion, and nobody involved ever publicly explained how it got through the initial screening process in the first place. 37. Soviet engineers built a tank that could submerge completely and drive along the ocean floor, and it genuinely worked during testing, which is honestly impressive. The problem revealed itself when someone looked at the air supply. The crew had 4 minutes of breathable air once the vehicle went underwater. Military planners then looked at the distance between the tank's launch point and any realistic enemy target. 4 minutes of driving along an ocean floor was not going to close that gap under any operational scenario anyone could map out. The submarine tank worked perfectly and was also completely useless at the same time. 38. Somewhere in a government building, in a real meeting, with real salaries in the room, someone proposed a grenade that releases a cloud of Limburger cheese smell to incapacitate enemies. It was approved, developed, and scheduled for an official field evaluation. Testers were assigned and the grenade was deployed in a controlled environment, so its effectiveness could be properly measured. Every single tester left the area before the evaluation period was finished. The weapon successfully cleared the testing zone of all human presence without question. It just cleared it of the wrong humans first, which was noted in the report, and apparently not considered disqualifying. 39. The Pentagon paid soldiers to sit in dark rooms and stare at blank walls for 20 years. The Stargate project was a genuine psychic warfare program where trained military personnel attempted to remotely view Soviet military installations using nothing but mental focus and concentration. Real budget, real salaries, real office space dedicated to staring. The program's own final internal report, written by the people who ran and believed in it, concluded it had produced no proven intelligence value across 2 full decades of operation. The Soviet bases went completely unviewed. The walls stayed blank. 20 years of government funding evaporated into a dark, quiet room. 40. The U.S. Navy built a submarine so committed to stealth, it could not send or receive any communications for weeks at a time while underwater. No messages in, no messages out. Complete silence in every direction. Leadership celebrated this as a tactical masterpiece. Then someone raised the question that apparently never came up during the entire design process. If the crew cannot receive incoming messages, they also cannot get updated orders, cannot receive new targeting data, and have no way of knowing whether the war they are currently fighting has already ended. The stealthiest submarine ever built was essentially sailing around completely alone with no idea what was happening above the surface. 41. Guns on hot air balloons. That was the plan. WWI Navy strapped weapons onto balloon baskets, loaded soldiers inside, and released them into the sky, fully expecting aerial combat to follow. Not one person in the planning room apparently stopped to ask how a balloon with no steering system was supposed to find an enemy aircraft. The balloon went wherever the wind felt like going that day. Soldiers floated peacefully in random directions, completely at the mercy of the weather, never once encountering an enemy plane. The wind took them on a lovely tour of the countryside and brought them back having accomplished absolutely nothing. 42. Grunard Island sits off the coast of Scotland, and for 50 years nobody was allowed anywhere near it. Britain tested Operation Vegetarian there during World War II, dropping millions of cattle feed cakes laced with anthrax spores to see if the plan could destroy Germany's food supply. The anthrax did not stay politely in one area. It saturated the island so completely and so permanently that the entire landmass remained under strict quarantine from 1942 all the way until 1990. Britain had successfully created a biological wasteland on its own soil. Germany's cows were fine. Scotland had a contaminated island for half a century. Nobody called that a win. 43. 47 flights happened before anyone asked the obvious question. America was flying a nuclear-powered airplane with a live reactor on board, and somewhere around Flight 48, someone finally put their hand up in a meeting and pointed out that a single crash would permanently irradiate a region the size of a small state. The program had been running long enough to fill a flight log before this particular concern entered the conversation. Once it did, the program was shut down with remarkable speed. The 47 flights that preceded that meeting were quietly filed away and not featured prominently in any press materials going forward. 44. It lasted 1 day. Austria's exploding bagpipe program was conceived, approved, demonstrated, and permanently cancelled within a single afternoon. The theory was that combining the psychological horror of bagpipe noise with an unexpected explosion would shatter enemy morale completely. A public demonstration was organized for military leadership. The operator stepped forward with the device, initiated the sequence, and was immediately taken out by the explosion during the very first attempt. Enemy soldiers were not present, and therefore experienced zero psychological damage. The program that was supposed to terrorize opposing forces succeeded only in terrorizing the person operating it on day 1. 45. The Pentagon developed a magnetic silencer for submarines specifically designed to make them undetectable to magnetic sea mines lurking on the ocean floor. It worked completely, and the submarines became genuinely invisible to any magnetic targeting system in the water. The engineering team celebrated this as a clean solution to a serious problem. Then the crew tried to navigate home. The silencer had wiped every single compass on board. Every magnetic instrument stopped functioning the moment the system activated. The Navy had produced a submarine that nothing in the ocean could find, including apparently the submarine crew themselves trying to figure out where they were. 46. America filled its harbors with full-sized plywood warships during World War II and positioned them directly beside real vessels to absorb enemy bombing raids. The decoys were detailed, convincing from altitude, and strategically placed for maximum effect. Enemy bombers arrived, surveyed the harbor, and hit every real ship with considerable accuracy, while leaving every plywood vessel completely untouched. After the raids, the fake fleet sat perfectly intact in the water without a single scratch, while the actual warships beside them absorbed the full damage. The military reviewed these results, noted the decoys had a 100% survival rate, and quietly stopped mentioning the program in strategic planning documents. 47. 10 men to carry it. More time to assemble it. A completely flat surface to build it on. Those were the requirements for the U.S. Army's largest bazooka, and battlefields met exactly none of them reliably. By the time the 10-soldier crew hauled all the components to the firing position, found level ground, and assembled the weapon into something functional, the enemy tank they had identified as the target had moved on to a completely different location. The most powerful anti-tank weapon in the inventory was beaten repeatedly by the simple fact that tanks do not wait around while 10 people unpack a very large box. 48. Operation Acoustic Kitty cost the CIA an amount of money that would make any reasonable accountant lose sleep. Surgeons implanted a live microphone and a working antenna directly inside a cat, transforming it into what agency planners genuinely believed was the perfect undetectable surveillance device. Animals roam freely, nobody suspects a cat, and Soviet officials would never notice. The finished cat was transported to Washington and released near its first target location. It immediately walked into a road and was struck by a passing vehicle. The most surgically advanced intelligence asset in CIA history lasted approximately 30 seconds in the field before the mission concluded permanently. 49. Aim without looking. That was the core requirement of the wristwatch pistol developed for CIA undercover agents. The weapon was a single-shot firearm built into a wristwatch casing, designed to be fired by pointing the wrist at a target while maintaining a completely casual and unsuspicious expression. Training sessions were arranged so agents could practice the technique before field deployment. The sessions revealed a consistent and immediate problem. Agents kept shooting themselves in the chin. The weapon specifically engineered to keep operatives safe in dangerous situations turned out to be most reliably dangerous to the operative wearing it during the practice sessions designed to make them comfortable with it. 50. Carry it in one hand. Die from it with your whole body. That was essentially the operational reality of the Davy Crockett nuclear landmine. It was compact enough for a single soldier to transport, which the Army presented as a genuine tactical innovation. What the specifications also confirmed, in numbers that were not hidden, was that the blast radius extended well beyond the weapon's maximum firing range. There was no position from which it could be fired that placed the soldier outside the kill zone. Every single use guaranteed the operator was inside the explosion before it happened. The Army issued these with full documentation and presumably hoped soldiers would not do the math. 51. Nobody who received the Davy Crockett nuclear landmine was encouraged to read the specifications too carefully. It was compact, portable, and could be carried and fired by a single soldier, which the Army presented as a significant tactical advantage in the field. The blast radius unfortunately extended well beyond the weapon's maximum effective firing range in every direction. There was no firing position, no angle, and no technique that placed the operator outside the area the explosion would reach. Military planners documented this, issued the weapon anyway, and the soldiers who received it were left to interpret that information however they personally saw fit. Somewhere out there, a guy strapped a camera to a pigeon, another guy stuffed chickens inside a nuclear bomb, and an entire government department spent 20 years staring at blank walls trying to read minds. And every single one of them thought they were the smartest person in the room. Welcome to human history, where the bar was apparently on the floor and somehow people still tripped over it. If any of these inventions made you question everything you learned in school, you are watching the right channel. Drop a comment right now telling us which one broke your brain the most, smash that like button so hard the engineer who designed the exploding bagpipe can feel it from whatever dimension he ended up in, and subscribe to Dumb Historical Inventions because we promise the next video is somehow even worse.